You as a CFO, you as a finance person, you as an SVP of supply chain might be pulling your hair out because you went through this exhaustive negotiation. You budgeted, you planned for your 4% increase, and you're wondering why now in August am I paying more when I'm shipping the same stuff out that cost less, let's say, in March of this year. Well, part of that is attributable to the fact that you took 2 fuel surcharge adjustments, one in April, one in July.
Welcome to Parcel Perspectives, the podcast dedicated to small parcel shippers. I'm Glenn Glooding, and each episode, we dive into insights, best practices, and strategies to help you navigate this complex, costly market. Join me as we explore ways to strengthen your long-term partnerships with your chosen carriers and stay competitively aligned.
Hello there, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to join me today for a discussion that doesn't sound very exciting on the surface. We're talking about fuel surcharges in the small parcel market. Talk about droll, talk about boring. Fuel surcharges have been in the space now for better part of 24 years. We've all become very apathetic to them. They exist, they permeate all of our expenses. And I thought it'd be very valuable for all of you to gain some of the insights that I've been able to glean from this and provide them in a way that you can apply as best practices in your own small parcel supply chains. So here goes. For starters, I want to break this down into 3 specific buckets. I want to break down fuel surcharges. I'd like to talk about the impact of fuel surcharges on your logistics budget, and then really the kind of the money aspect of things. What are the strategies you might be able to employ for negotiating or mitigating fuel surcharge expenses? Hope you find this helpful. So let's start with what the heck are fuel surcharges and why are they applied? Well, right around the turn of 2000, the carriers began implementing fuel surcharges. Now, there's a couple constants in the small parcel supply chain billing world. One is if a carrier ever introduces a billing methodology, a revenue stream, that revenue stream will not go away. That's a promise. History has proven me to be correct on this, and I can't wait for some carrier to prove me wrong. We'd all benefit. The second is, of course, you can always count on an annual rate increase, what they call that good old-fashioned GRI, general rate increase. Now, what you may not know, and what I'd like to walk through for everyone here is, how are fuel surcharges calculated by carriers, and what role of fuel price indexes are there in determining surcharge rates? Well, when you look at a carrier fuel surcharge table, and for this example, I'm going to use UPS. I'm not picking on UPS. All the carriers impose this, minus USPS. But I want to just share this here. What you see here is UPS's fuel surcharge page. And what they have is they have a listing of the fuel surcharges applied by mode. For today's discussion, I'm going to limit it to domestic ground surcharge, but effectively the methodologies remain the same. They may point to different indices. We can see that the carriers go through and they adjust their fuel surcharge on a weekly basis. So weekly, the carriers look for something, which I'll show in a minute, and based off of that indice, they adjust their fuel surcharge accordingly. Now, if you were to look at the carrier's master fuel surcharge table, you would see a bunch of price ranges off to the left, along with an associated fuel surcharge percentage to the right. And so what we see right now, effective August 12th, 2024, is a 16.25% ground domestic fuel surcharge. So let's point now to how the heck are these determined? What are they pointing to? What you have here is the Department of Energy's petroleum on highway or petroleum rates across a variety of different fuel types. Specific to ground domestic services in the small parcel world, they tie their indices to this U.S. on-highway diesel fuel prices in a dollars per gallon format. And what the U.S. Department of Energy posts are these different indices tracked by geography. For the case of the small parcel market, They base it off of the US market. And so effective August 5th, the on-highway diesel fuel price per gallon nationwide was $3.75.5 per gallon. That cost correlates directly to a matrix that would equate to the 16.25% fuel surcharge you see today. For those of you that really dive into the supply chain space, you may be looking at this and going, that's something, but it's nothing compared to what I see in the truckload and less than truckload world. You're right. And the carriers are exploiting this. And so I want to talk about some historical trends and some of the nuanced increases that the carriers in general are imposing on you as a consumer that you may not be aware of. So this next slide I'm going to share with you is an Excel slide. It's got a lot of numbers, but I'm going to try to do my best to walk you through this and help you understand that impact. What we have here is an indicative example on the left-hand side, columns B and C, of that matrix, as I was referring to earlier, this cost range. So you can see the different cost ranges, $2.30 to $2.42. That's pointing to the U.S. average on-highway diesel price as we saw on the Department of Energy's website. For the basis of this example and discussion, I want to grab a moment in time. So I've highlighted row 8, which represents $2.90 to $3.02. We all know right now that fuel is trading way above that, about 75 cents greater per gallon. But for the basis of this conversation, I thought this would be helpful. Now, above here, you see a number of dates, starting at March 2nd, 2021, and continuing through July 15th of 2024. There happen to be 10 unique dates here. These dates represent times that UPS manipulated their fuel surcharge table. Not to your benefit as a consumer, but to your benefit if you're an investor of UPS stock. They've done this to improve their financial returns on a quarterly basis and do it in a way that kind of slides under the radar. You don't really realize it. Anyone ever hear of that old adage, how do you boil a frog? Well, you do it a degree at a time, right? Put the frog in a pan of cold water and put it on the oven and gently heat that up. The frog never detects the temperature change. Of course, I would never advocate for that, but I think it makes for an interesting metaphorical comparison to what the carriers are doing to us as frogs or the consumers in this environment. If we were to operate in a time vacuum where fuel never fluctuated, and let's say for the sake of this discussion, it was frozen at $3 per gallon for this time range that we're looking at right now, March of 21 through July of 24. In March 2nd of 21, the fuel surcharge would be 7.5% for ground services. And then every subsequent date you see here, July 5th, August 16th of 21, November 15th, the carrier, in this case UPS, has adjusted the associated fuel surcharge amount commensurate with that price. So as we go through this list, what we can see now at the end here at July 15th of 24, fuel surcharge in our time vacuum of $3 per gallon would now be 14.5%. Let's get your head around that. 7.5% March of 21. 14.5% July of 24. That, my friends, is a cooked frog. Now, some important things to consider about this in analyzing the effect on your transportation budget over time. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to paint a picture and give you an illustrative example using our time vacuum on, let's just talk about a typical parcel. So in scrolling down on my Excel spreadsheet here, I've pulled down a typical example for characteristics of a parcel to illustrate in a point and what the effect on your budget may be. For this, I've grabbed a ground residential parcel that represents a Zone 4 3-pound package. Now for this, it's residential, so it gets a residential surcharge, And for the sake of this example, I've also said it falls within a delivery area surcharge zip code. Perhaps a topic for another day, but I know you folks are advanced procurers and you know exactly what delivery area surcharge represents. So in this time vacuum, I'm imagining that no carrier rate increases, no GRIs. Remember that second bullet point that I talked about of the things that we can always count on? No GRIs in this time vacuum example from March to July. And so the transportation cost, the residential surcharge, and the DAS is going to remain the same for this example. All in, exclusive of fuel, not including fuel, the total expense to ship that parcel in this example is $15.38. Now, in March of 21, if you recall, fuel surcharge was 14.5%. At 14.5%, that represents $1.15 in fuel applied to each one of these charges for a total of $16.53. Now let's go all the way forward to July 15th. Fuel in this time frame is now at 14.5%. Same package, same base transportation charges, no increases, but fuel goes from $1.15 to $2.23, $1.08 more. Same package in our time vacuum would now cost $17.61. Folks, that's a 94% increase on fuel. When I frame it that way, it doesn't look so subtle or so benign anymore, does it? These are important things. Now imagine the effect of fuel in a real world environment where things like general rate increases occur as well. Now, the last part of this conversation is, well, what the heck do you do about it, right? What the heck do you do about it? Negotiating strategies or mitigation strategies around fuel. I think to start with, it's important to, once again, think about things from a carrier perspective. How are they managing this? When you look at your overall small parcel expense, we're going to make some rough ratios or assumptions on this. 70% is attributable to the direct transportation rate, that ground residential rate. The 30% is attributed to the accessorials and the surcharges, the resi surcharge, the delivery area surcharge. Absolutely, fuel weighs into that. As a matter of fact, fuel, as far as surcharges, is number one on the expense list of surcharges and accessorials as it contributes to your overall supply chain expense. It's a lot of dollars there. Now, the way carriers have kind of managed things over the years is, you're all skilled procurers. You're all good business people out there. You're good at negotiating things you can understand and things you can quantify and analyze. Transportation is pretty easy. Heck, residential surcharge, pretty easy to understand and quantify. Delivery area surcharge starts to get a little more slippery. What zip codes exactly are affected there and why, right? Fuel becomes much more ambiguous on how to grasp it. It gets applied to everything. And as a percentage of the total billed expense, transportation related expenses that you're being billed by the carrier, it grows with GRIs as well. So carriers like to placate skilled negotiators. And so what we've seen in the industry is things called incentive creep. What once was a good ground residential discount may not be good in today's world based off of the elevation of rates on a year-over-year basis. How do the carriers make up that loss or that loss in revenue or that increased discount on that? Well, they get it through the ambiguous stuff. Fuel surcharge is a great example. Other accessorials and surcharges that are hard to quantify. So that 70% has a tendency to get compressed by good negotiators, like all of you listeners out there. The 30% has a tendency to expand, claw back, or retain margin on behalf of the carrier through their complex billing methodologies. Fuel and the increases that I'm highlighting for you are a little more devious as well. Some of you have gone far enough to negotiate good things like rate caps and say, okay, I've I've negotiated with FedEx or I've negotiated with UPS or On Track or whomever it is that I've capped the increase I'm going to take on a year-over-year basis, and I set it at 4%. Good for you. That's great. Guess what? Fuel doesn't apply to that. And as you saw, we looked at the highlight of just over 3 years of time, and there were 10 increases. Each one of those increases were done at times that didn't correlate to the GRI, if you noticed. So those increases in fuel circumvent rate caps. They circumvent what you think you're getting. So you as a CFO, you as a finance person, you as an SVP of supply chain might be pulling your hair out because you went through this exhaustive negotiation. You budgeted, you planned for your 4% increase, and you're wondering why now in August am I paying more when I'm shipping the same stuff out that cost less, let's say, in March of this year. Well, part of that is attributable to the fact that you took 2 fuel surcharge adjustments, one in April, one in July. We'll keep watching. There could be more in 2024 before we enter the holiday season. So you have to understand that, and you have to try to position this accordingly with the carrier. Shine a bright light on the impact of fuel. There was a time when I would tell you that getting a fuel surcharge discount was a hard ask in a negotiation. Well, if you're a carrier and you're imposing 94% increases into fuel over the last 3+ years, it's much easier now to offer discounts on that because they've elevated the revenue so much. So it is not unheard of to get discounts on fuel. Just beware. Make sure you approach these strategies and conversations from a holistic perspective. It's very easy for a carrier to placate you and give you what you're asking for, and something you're really tied to emotionally, like fuel, and get it in other areas. So try to have analytics and a perspective that looks at it holistically, and you can compress that spend from all angles. I hope that this dive into fuel surcharge was helpful for you. I hope it shed some light. By all means, if I can be of any assistance to you, offer any further guidance, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Parcel Perspectives, hosted by me, Glenn Glooding. I've been in the small parcel space for 37 years, starting with a deep and broad background working for one of the major carriers as an operator and industrial engineer, later managing pricing at the highest level for the largest, most complex shippers in the world. Since then, I've been a national thought leader and worked to help drive strategy for clients from Fortune 50 companies to startup e-commerce businesses, helping them more competitively align in this complex and expensive market. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share with friends. Join us next time for more expert advice and strategies to stay ahead of the shipping game.